How you doing there? Welcome back to to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, okay. Yesterday we were talking all about Sfiras HaOmer. At the end of the Daf, we got into this question about if you do Digun, if you do Meruach on Hekdish, so then is that grain going to be Chayav in Trumas and Maaser, right? If you have grain that finished its processing and all of its threshing and winnowing and all that stuff, and you put it in a pile and you did whatever final steps you had to do, and now it's all piled up and ready to go. So if it's hektish, we discussed whether or not that would be chayav in trumas and masris or not. The consensus ultimately was it would be potter from trumas and masris. On today's daf, we push that discussion further, and we discuss if there will be trumas and masris for the produce of an oved Kochavim. So it's actually a little bit tricky what exactly it's talking about, but let's assume it's talking about you buy produce from an oved Kochavim, the oved Kochavim, and all of these steps that we just discussed that a year would do in terms of threshing and winnowing and piling and meruaching. The oved Kochavim did all those things, and now you purchase that produce. So is it going to be chayiv in trumas and masris or not? That, right, if you buy produce from an oved Kochavim. And secondly, is there challah for the dough of an oved Kochavim? So if an oved Kochavim makes a dough, and I reckon you purchase that dough from the oved Kochavim, would you have to separate challah from it? That is, so those are basically be'etzim the two sugyos on today's daf. So really pushing forward that discussion about to which things trumas and masris apply to, and then we kind of that then shifts into challah a bit and how they relate to one another. So I guess a little bit more of a detailed technical daf, but important sugyas about trumas and masris and where they apply and their limitations. So I think it's a gewaldige daf. Let's jump in and let's learn Daf Samach Zayin of Masechta Menachos together. Friends, we begin on Daf Samach Vav Amid Beis, about 15 or so lines from the bottom. Amar Rava says, Rava Pshitali de Meruach Hekdish Poter. So Rava says, related to our discussion from yesterday, that Meruach, which is the final step of making grain. I was trying to look into it a little bit yesterday, what exactly Meruach is. I still can't, right? I always understood Meruach, as I discussed a little bit yesterday, to be the smoothing out of the pile. Maybe it is. Maybe when after you make a pie, you walk around and you smooth it. I don't know. But I was imagining, I think the point is it's like the kind of the final step, I think. And that's how I'm imagining it. Again, if somebody understands more about the practical the meaning and place for Meruach, please let us know. But I imagine Meruach is kind of like, okay, this is done. Kilu, up until then, there's a whole process. You're harvesting, you're threshing, you're winnowing, you're doing all sorts of things until the grain is finally ready to be stored away. And the final thing is you take it to wherever you're going to be storing it, you put it in a pile, you make sure that the pile is all organized, and now you lock the door and you have your grain. At that point, it is chayav in trumas and masris. So now, if at the time that final step happened, that it was put in the pile and the pile was organized and ready for long-term storage, if at that point the produce was hektish, it was owned by the gizbar, by the temple treasury, so it will be potter from trumas and masris, right? So Amar Rava says, Rava Pshitali, it's obvious to me, the meruach hektish, that when it comes to meruach of hektish, potter, it is going to be potter from trumas and masris since it's hektish. Va'afilu Rabbi Akiva, and even Rabbi Akiva, who said that when it comes to the minchas ha'omer, after the solas has been extracted from the ephah, the remaining 90%, Rabbi Akiva says it's chayav in trumas and masris. That is because it's not hektish. That's why it's chayav in trumas and masris. Loko mechayev asum ela shelo nitnu mos el letzorich, and that's only because the money that was invested in the barley for the minchas ha'omer was only invested in the part that was going to be used for the minchas ha'omer, the 10%, the isaron of solas. The other 90% was never purchased for use in the temple. It was never hektish, it was never kadosh, and that's why it's chayav in Trumas and Maaser, according to Rabbi Akiva. Aval meruach hektish ba'alma poter, but even Rabbi Akiva would agree that conceptually meruach for hektish will be chayav, will be poter in Trumas and Maaser. I think I confused that at the end of a daf. So if anybody yesterday was listening to the daf and heard me maybe say potter when I should have said chayiv, unfortunately, I think I kind of made a mistake there at the end. So a little bit of confusing sugya. I apologize for that. So if you thought you heard wrong, you may have. But anyways, says Rava, it's clear to him that everyone agrees, even Rabbi Akiva agrees, that when it comes to meruach for hektish, it's going to be potter from Trumas and Maasers. Okay, Lama potter, fine. The shaila is meruach oved Kochavim tanoihi. Rava says that when it comes to meruach of an oved Kochavim, so it's a little bit of a tricky sugya, but I'm going to say it's talking about the following: that an oved Kochavim owns property in Eretz Yisrael, and the oved Kochavim has a field and harvests the field, and the oved Kochavim does all the processes of harvesting and processing the grain, and does meruach himself. He then goes to the market and sells this produce to a yid. The shaila is this produce going to be chayav in Trumas and Maaser? Do we say that the fact that the meruach was done by the oved Kochavim, the property of the oved Kochavim, so therefore, it's done by an oved Kochavim, it's not just like by hektish, it's not shaykh to Trumas and Maaser. By oved Kochavim, it's ochet, potter from Trumas and Maaser, it's not shaykh to Trumas and Maaser. Or do we say that it's still going to be chayav in Trumas and Maaser, even though it was owned and processed by oved Kochavim? Grain that grew in Eretz Yisrael is going to be nonetheless chayav in Trumas and Maaser. So when you buy it from the oved Kochavim, you're going to have to separate Trumas and Maaser yourself. Das is the shaila. Tanoi, it's a machlokas tanoim desanya that we learned about. Is a tarmin mishel Yisrael al shel Yisrael. Okay, if you have the produce of a yid, and that produce of a yid needs to be tied, so you can use the produce of I assume the point is another yid, meaning the produce of a yid can be used as Trumas and Maaser for the produce of a yid. And the produce of an oved Kochavim can be used, I guess, if you have produce purchased from oved Kochavim, so other produce from oved Kochavim can be used to be poter, to satisfy Trumas and Maaser. And similarly, the produce of a kusi to be used for tithing the produce of a kusi. Of course, these kusim were these people who converted to Judaism, and they're this very unclear kind of population. It's a machlokes. Are they geri arayis? Are they geri emes? Are they real? Did they convert to Judaism with the right intentions, so they're actually Yidden? Did they only convert to Judaism because there was an issue with lions kind of eating up the people, and they wanted to kind of have certain protections, so they only converted to get protection from lions, but they aren't actually real Yidden. It's a machlokes. It's unclear exactly. Whenever the kutis come up, it's a little bit confusing, because are they Jewish? Are they not Jewish? Even if they are Jewish, they didn't do all the mitzvahs. Some mitzvahs they did, some mitzvahs they didn't do. The mitzvahs that they did really well, even better than the Yid did. It's a little bit of a confusing status. Tosfos Taka talks, gets into machlokes a little bit. Are they Yidden? Are they not Yidden? But suffice it to say that even if they are Yidden, they are not particularly scrupulous when it comes to mitzvahs. Umishal kol al shel kol. And none of that you can mix and match. The produce of a yid could be separated to be poter as tithes for the produce of a kusi or an oved Kochavim. Also vice versa, the produce of an oved Kochavim or a kusi can be used to tithe produce of a yid. Divrei Meir. This is Reb Meir. So essentially, Divrei Meir of Reb Yehuda. That's the opinion of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say that be'etzem the meruach of an oved Kochavim is going to be chayiv in Trumas and Maaser, just like the meruach of a yid or of a kusi. they're all going to be chayiv in Trumas and Maaser. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, whereas Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon say, Tormin Mishal Yisrael, Al Shal Yisrael. You can tithe from the produce of a yid for a yid, Mishal Ovdei Kochavim, Al Shal Kusim. And in oved Kochavim, you can tithe, right? The produce of a kusi can be tied from the produce of an oved Kochavim, Mishal Kusim, Al Shal Ovdei Kochavim, and Kusim and Ovdei Kochavim are interchangeable as well. They can be tied on one another. Aval lo mishal Yisrael al shal ovdei kochavim shal kusim. If you have produce of an oved kochavim or kusi, do not separate the produce of a yid as tithes. Velo mishal ovdei kochavim shal kusim al shal Yisrael. If you have the produce of a yid that needs to be tied, do not use produce from an oved kochavim or a kusi in order to be the tithe. So we see that according to Reb Shimon and according to Reb Yossi, the produce of an oved kochavim is not interchangeable with that of a yid. You cannot use it as a tithe against the produce of a yid and vice versa. So we see according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon that meruach of an oved kochavim is potter from Trumas and Maaser. So we have a machlokes here when it comes to the produce of an oved kochavim. If an oved kochavim processed all of he had produce and he processed it and he did meruach, is it chayiv in Trumas and Maaser or not? Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say that it is chayiv in Trumas and Maaser, and you can even use the produce of an oved kochavim as tithes for the produce of a yid. So if a yid had a bunch of produce that needed to be tithed and he purchased a bunch of produce from oved kochavim, he can use that produce as the tithe. Whereas Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say that no, you wouldn't be able to use the produce of an oved kochavim as a tithe for the produce of a yid, because the meruach of an oved kochavim does not make it chayiv midoraisa in Trumas and Maaser. Okay. It would be potter for Trumas and Maaser, the meruach of an oved kochavim, according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. Fine. Gilgul hektish. When it comes to Challah, moving on to Challah. When it comes to Challah, so a dough becomes chayiv in Challah when it is properly kneaded. When it's properly kneaded, the dough is now chayiv in Challah. So if you have a dough that is hektish, and this dough is kneaded, this hektish dough is kneaded, it's going to be potter from Challah. Gilgul hektish potter. The kneading of a hektish dough is potter from Challah. The snan that we learned in the Mishnah in Masechta Challah, hekdisha isasa, if you have a woman who was making a dough and she was makdish the dough. Now she hadn't yet properly kneaded it. At the time that she was makdish the dough, it wasn't yet chayiv in Challah. Achalo gilgala, she didn't yet properly knead it, and therefore wasn't yet chayiv in Challah. Ufdaito, not only that, she then redeemed it from hektish, and it still hadn't been properly kneaded and chayeves in Challah. And now, subsequently, she now needs it chayeves. It's chayeves Challah because at the time that it was made chayev in Challah, when it was gilgala, when it was properly, thoroughly kneaded, it was hers. It wasn't hektish at the time. Similarly, mishe gilgala, if she was makdishit when it was already chayeves in Challah, so she had already kneaded the dough properly. It was already chayeves in Challah. Then she was makdishit, and then she ufdaita, then she redeemed it. Also chayeves, she's going to have to separate Challah, because again, when it became chayev in Challah, it was not hektish, it was hers. Hekdisha ad sheloi gilgala, if she was makdish the dough before it was properly kneaded and chayeves in Challah, the gilgalta a gizber, and then the temple treasurer completed the kneading, and meaning it was chayeves and it became chayeves in Challah and completed the kneading while hektish. And then it was redeemed, but again it became the point at which it would be chayev in Challah, it was hektish at the time. Pitura, it's ptura from from Challah Shabashas Chovasu, because the time that it would have become Chayiv in Challah Oisa Ptura, it was Hektish and Ptura from Challah. Okay. Now, by Rava asks Gilgul Oved Kochavim Mai. Now Rava wants to know what about the Challah of an Oved Kochavim. Right, just like we had asked earlier, we said that tithes that the Meruach happens when it's Hektish, apart from Trumas and Maaser. We then asked about what about produce of an Oved Kochavim, the Meruach of an Oved Kochavim. Similar, now we're asking the question with regard to Challah. That Challah of Hektish is potter, right? A dough of Hektish is potter from Challah. What about the dough of an Oved Kochavim? Mishnah, now we have a Mishnah 3 Mishnayos later in Masechta Challah. Gershon is Gayer. A Ger Tzedek. You have a Gentile who decides that he wants to be a Yid. Now this Gentile owns a pizza shop. And every day they make dough. And on the day that he converted, on the day that he became a Yid, there were doughs at the pizza shop. And the shaila is, do these doughs need to be, are they chayiv in challah or not? So Gershon is Gayer v'aiselo Isa, and he has dough. Naisas ad shalom is Gayer potter. So any doughs that were made chayiv in, that kind of would have been chayiv in challah, but at the right, meaning when they were properly kneaded, he was still a oved kochavim. So potter, so there's no chiyuv challah. Mishin is Gayer, but if the doughs are properly kneaded post conversion, chayiv. Well, now it became chayiv in challah. It's time that he was a yid. So the chayiv in challah, sofek chayiv, and if he's not sure at which point they were properly kneaded, was he a yid yet? Was he not a yid yet? So then separate challah nonetheless. So what do we see? So we see clearly that the dough, that the challah of an oved kochavim, that the dough of an oved kochavim is potter from challah. But we say if he was properly kneaded while he was still an oved kochavim, it's potter from challah. After his conversion, it's chayiv, but before then, it's potter. So now Rava wants to know, Homan katonila, according to whom does this go? You see, when it came to meruach of an oved kochavim, when it came to trumas and maaser an oved kochavim, we said that it's a big machlokes. Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda on one side, Rab Shimon and Rab Yossi on the other side. What would happen here when it comes to the challah of an oved kochavim? Do we have that same machlokes? Do we say divrei akoli? Do we say that maybe there is a consensus here that all four opinions, Rab Meir, Rab Yehuda, Rab Yossi, Rab Shimon, everyone would agree here, potter from challah? Vafilu Rab Meir, Rab Yehuda, and even Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda, the kamechayve hasam, who said by Trumas and Maaser that meruach of an oved kochavim is chayav in Trumas and Maaser. Patri Ocha, they would say here by challah potter, the challah of oved kochavim. How come? Because asamu dichsiv, because you see when it comes to Trumas and Maaser, the pasuk says digancha yisera. It says digancha a bunch of times, 3 times. I have the psukim. I'll read you. The pasuk 1 says losucha alecha b'sherecha masa digancha v'sirosha, etc. Another pasuk v'chatav v'nei Hashem lekecha b'makom asher yivchai l'shakin sh'vasham masa digancha torshka v'tzerecha, etc. Reish is digancha torshka v'tzerecha. So when it comes to Trumas and Maaser, it says digancha 3 times. The first time it says digancha, your dagan, as opposed to hektish. Okay, meruach of hektish, there's no Trumas and Maaser. But then it says digancha another time. Now that one is to exclude the dagan of an oved kochavim, that the meruach and oved kochavim is potter. But then it says digancha another time. Right? Again, the first time it says digancha, it's to exclude dagan of hektish. Now it says digancha a second time. This time to exclude the dagan of an oved kochavim. But then it says digancha a third time. Once again to exclude the dagan of an oved kochavim. Your dagan, not the dagan of oved kochavim. How come it excluded the dagan of an oved kochavim twice? It's a miut achar miut. It's excluding the dagan of an oved kochavim after it already excluded the dagan of an oved kochavim. Twice it excluded the dagan of oved kochavim. Miut achar miut. Ve'en miut achar miut el l'rabos. We have a miut achar miut and miut achar miut el l'rabos. That when you have a double exclusion, it's actually coming as an inclusion, and therefore, so when it comes to Trumas and Maaseris, specifically because of the miut achar miut, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir say that the Meiruch and Oved Kochavim is chayav. It's Trumas and Maaseris. Afilu Ovdei Kochavim, that even Ovdei Kochavim chayav and Trumas and Maaseris. Aval hacha, but you see over here when it comes to Challah, you don't have that miut achar miut. Trei zimne arisosechem ksiv. It says arisosechem twice. One pasuk says reishis arisosechem Challah Terumah Terumah, and the very next pasuk says mereishis arisosechem titnu, etc. So chad arisosechem, skip to the next line. Velo isas ovdei kochavim. One arisosechem is your dough to the exclusion of the dough of the kochavim, and now add the words v'chad arisosechem velo isas hektish, and not the dough of hektish. So dough belonging to hektish, as we saw earlier, as well as dough belonging to oved kochavim, are pturin from challah. So we want to say that even Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, who say that by Trumas and Maaseris, the Meiruch of oved kochavim is chayav in Trumas and Maaseris, but they would perhaps say that by challah of an oved kochavim would be potter from Challah, right? The dough of oved kochavim would be potter from Challah because it says arisosechem to the exclusion, right? Your dough to the exclusion of dough of an oved kochavim, potter from Challah. Even according to Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir. Odilma, or perhaps Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon katanila, or maybe no, the Mishnah that says that the dough of oved kochavim is potter from Challah is specifically Reb Shimon and Reb Yossi, who said that also the Meiruach of the oved kochavim is potter from Trumas and Maaseris. De kapatre, they say pataval, but maybe Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, that Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda who said that by Meiruach Ovdei Kochavim chayiv in Trumas and Maaseris, Gamre, they would say reishis mehosam. It says reishis by Trumas and Maaseris, reishis degan chator shchav, and also by Challah reishis arisosechem. And just like by Trumas and Maaseris, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir say chayiv in Trumas and Maaseris, so maybe also by Challah of an oved kochavim they would say chayiv in Challah. So that's the shaila. The shaila is that when it comes to the Challah of an oved kochavim, or the dough of an oved kochavim, is it chayiv in Challah or not? Does everyone agree that it is potter from Challah, or maybe only Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon agree, but Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir would disagree and say that it's potter from Challah? They would say it's chayiv from Reb Yossi. Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir would say chayiv in Challah, just like they say chayiv by Trumas and Maaseris. I hope I didn't mess anything up there. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. But basically, does everybody agree when it comes to Challah, or do you have the same machlokas, essentially, by Challah? Omar Rava, ye Raiva de Achze Bechelma, says Rava, may it be the will that I see the solution to this quandary in a dream. Hadar Omar Rava, Rava then said, I got it. Manda Omar, Meiruach ha'oved kochavim poter. According to Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, who say the Meiruach of the oved kochavim is potter from Trumas and Maaseris, Gilgal oved kochavim potter, they also say that the dough of an oved kochavim is potter from Challah. Manda Omer, Meiruach oved kochavim Eino poter, and according to Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, who say that the Meiruach, that the Trumas and Maaseris, but oved kochavim chayiv in Trumas and Maaseris, Gilgal oved kochavim Eino poter, also when it comes to the dough of oved kochavim, they will be chayiv. So Rava ultimately concludes that the machlokes is consistent. Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir say chayiv, that when it comes to oved kochavim, chayiv Trumas and Maaseris and chayiv Challah. Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say when it comes to the Meiruach of oved kochavim by Trumas and Maaseris, potter for Trumas and Maaseris, and also potter fin Challah. Rav Papa asks a kasha on Rava. Rava, you say that that if you say Trumas, right, by Ovdei Kochavim, if you say yes Trumas and Maaser, then yes Challah. No Trumas and Maaser, no Challah. But let me ask you a kasha. Oved Kochavim shefish Peter Chomer. So if you have an Oved Kochavim who subsequently converted to Judaism, now when he was an Oved Kochavim, his donkey gave birth. His donkey gave birth to a firstborn donkey. Mazel tov. Now, of course, the halacha is, we're going to learn about this in Masechta Bechoros, right? There's a halacha, there's a mitzvah of pigeon peter chamor, that the firstborn of a donkey must be redeemed. Right? Tifter b'seh, kol peter, what it says, tifter b'seh, I'm not remembering the pasuk now, v'im lo sifter v'arafto. Peter chamorcha, tifter b'seh, something like that. V'im lo sifter v'arafto. That the halacha is that your firstborn donkey, male donkey, needs to be swapped for a sheep. Basically, you give a sheep to a kohen, and then you give a sheep to the kohen, and now the donkey belongs to you. Do whatever, it's yours now. If you don't give that sheep to the kohen, so then you take an axe and you hack off its head. It's better probably just to give the sheep to the kohen. So you have this fellow, he was not yet Jewish, his donkey gave birth to a firstborn, and he had set aside a sheep that he was going to, give to a kohen, after he converted, whatever it is, but now he converted. So he set aside a pigeon peter chomer, a sheep, to redeem his donkey, challah, or he had a dough that he was making, and he had set aside challah. Again, he wasn't yet Jewish. But then he converted to Judaism. Modim also, we let him know potter, that because at the time he was not yet a Jew, so there was no need for pigeon peter chomer or for separating challah. The challah is not considered challah. Anybody can eat it. It doesn't have to be eaten by a priest. A non-priest can eat it as well. Upeter chomer gozes ve'oved bo. And in terms of the peter chomer, in terms of the sheep that was set aside as a peter chomer, normally when you have a korban that's been redeemed, let's say you have a korban that gets a mum, so you redeem it, right? And somebody buys it, you sell it, let's say. So that person, it still has some limitations to it, right? If you have an animal that was set aside as a korban, it got a mum. You can eat it, you could slaughter and eat it. You can't, if it's a sheep, you can't shear its wool. You can't have it do whatever kind of work that a sheep can do. However, in this case, this sheep, because he was not yet Jewish at the time, so we say, Peter chomer gozes, you can shear the wool, oved bo, you can work with it if you want to. There's no kedusha at all. Hatrumaso asur, but the diuk is, but the true, if you had set aside any truma as an oved kochavim, it would be truma. It would be truma, it would be asur lezar. V'ahai tana de omer meruach oved kochavim eino potter. So we see here that the meruach oved kochavim, the trumas hamasris of oved kochavim, he's chayiv in trumas hamasris. He is, what was he? Hatrumaso asura is chayiv in trumas hamasris. So that would sound like Rabbi Yossi, that would sound like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, who say that the meruach of oved kochavim is chayiv in trumas hamasris. And yet, what do we say? V'gilgul oved kochavim potter. And yet we're saying, even though by trumas hamasris the oved kochavim is chayiv, but when it came to challah and when it came to peter chomer, we said potter. So we see that there's an inconsistency there. Right? Rava had said that if you say that an oved kochavim is chayiv in trumas hamasris, it's chayiv in challah, and here we're saying that they're chayiv in trumas hamasris, but potter from challah. Ve'od. And more so, Ovdei Ravina l'Rava. Ravina asked Rava, Chalas oved kochavim. When it comes to the challah of oved kochavim, ba'aretz, even in Eretz Yisrael, v'trumaso b'chutz la'aretz, and his truma in chutz la'aretz modiin. Also, we let him know sheu potter, that there is no that there is no chiyuv of challah or truma for an oved kochavim. So chalasu necheles zarim, right? The challah can be eaten by non-priests. V'trumaso ena midamas, and the truma is not truma. The truma from chutz la'aretz is not truma, and if it gets mixed in with chulin, there's no issue of dimua. Hatrumaso be'eretz ba'aretz aser, but any truma that he may have set aside in Eretz Yisrael would be aser. So once again, so again, we're seeing that the truma in Eretz Yisrael of an oved kochavim would be chayiv. So that's again like Reb Yehuda and Reb Meir, that the meiruach and oved kochavim is chayiv in trumas and masters, and yet Gilgal oved kochavim potter was saying that there's no challah when it comes to oved kochavim, and you can give it to a non-Kohen, it is fine. So again, here we see an inconsistency. We see that you can have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir who say that by Trumas and Masris and oved kochavim would be chayiv, and yet by challah they're saying potter. Rava had said that there was a consistency, that the opinion who says that an oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Masris would say chayiv in challah, and those who say potter in Trumas and Masris is potter for challah, and yet we just had two examples where an oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Masris, and yet potter from challah. So Rava would answer midrabanan, that when we say in these examples that an oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Masris, that's a gezer, it's midrabanan, gezer mishum ba'alei kisim, as a concern for wealthy people. What does that mean? Rashi gives two pshats. I think I find the second one a little bit easier to work with, which is that you might have wealthy people, and these wealthy people might own several fields. And if you have several fields producing a lot of produce, well then 20%, 20 or so percent, a little bit more, going to Trumas and Masris is 20% of your product. That's quite a bit. And therefore these wealthy people who have a thriving business and can afford it, they are going to try to find ways to avert, to go around the Trumas and Masris, to avoid Trumas, having to separate Trumas and Masris. What will they do? Well, they'll find an oved kochavim. They'll make some kind of a kinyan to oved kochavim. That way it technically belongs to oved kochavim, and they won't have to separate Trumas and Masris. So therefore, midrabanan, the chachamim say no, even the produce of oved kochavim you need to separate Trumas and Masris, and that way it avoids this kind of loophole of sorts where these ba'alei kisim, these wealthy people with deep pockets, they would find ways to make kinyanim with oved kochavim, since they would be part of Trumas and Masris, right? Because so if we say, like Reb Yossi and like Reb Shimon, that oved kochavim are potter, that the meiruch of oved kochavim is potter from Trumas and Masris, so then the wealthy people would go and make some kind of a kinyan with the oved kochavim, so that their produce would be potter from Trumas and Masris, and they can avoid the tithe. So says Rava that, look, according to Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, right, this would be like Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, that really Meikar Adin, the Ovdei Kochavim are potter from Trumas and Masris, and that's also why we're seeing that they're potter from Challah, because those who say potter from Trumas and Masris say potter from Challah. The reason why it says in these two brises that they are chayiv in Trumas and Masris, that is because of a gezer derabanan that was put in place in order to make sure that wealthy people with lots of fields won't find ways to avoid Trumas and Masris by making a kinyan to oved kochavim, because the fact of the matter is, midrabanan, even the meiruach of oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Masris. But again, me'ikar adin, it's consistent. There's no chiyuv challah and there's no Trumas, there's no chiyuv Trumas and Masris, me'ikar adin. Now, fact the Gemara, yachi challah nami, but then why don't we say the same thing by challah then? Let's make a gezerah by challah. Let's say you have a baker. Let's say you have a big bakery. A big bakery, they make bread for everybody. They're the biggest bakery. So for them also, challah is a big expense. So let's be consistent. Let's say just like we made a gezerah by the ovdei kochavim by Trumas and Masris for people that have lots of fields. So then there should also then be a gezerah by challah, that the challah of the kochavim, right, the dough of the kochavim, you should have to separate your challah. Because what about people have big bakery business, so challah is a big expense. Well, efshar da'afi la pachas mechameshes urvayim kemach ve'od. Well, the thing is, there is a minimum requirement of dough that is chayiv in challah. And therefore, when it comes to, yes, maybe somebody has a big bakery and it'll try to get out of separating challah. Well, truth is, if this person with the big bakery wanted to get out of separating challah, there are ways he could do it without having to make a kinyan with an oved kochavim. He could just make the batches smaller. If you make a small enough batch, it's not going to be chayiv in challah. So therefore, it's not a concern by challah because there are ways to avoid the chiyuv challah anyways without requiring an oved kochavim. Just make a smaller batch that would not yet be chayiv in challah. Okay, but if that's the case, truma nami efshir davle kedur boshai, but again, then you can say the same thing by trumas and maasers then. If you're interested, like these wealthy people are interested in doing, in avoiding the trumas and maasers, there are ways to avoid trumas and maasers that don't require making a kinyan with the goy. Like Rabbi Boshai, the Amr Boshai, Mayrim Adam Atvuaso Machnisa b'mot Challah. Kadesh Tebemto Ocheles Uftum Mina Maaser. Right, as we've been saying, when is produce chayiv and trumas and maasers? After meruach, after it's been properly processed. However, if when it's not yet properly processed, if it's not yet finished, right, you can bring it into his house with its chaff still on it, not fully processed, not yet chayiv and trumas and maasers. Bring it into his house, so that his animal can eat from it, and it's part from Maaser. Alternatively, what he can do is, right, I believe that there are two ways for produce to be chayiv and trumas and maasers. One is to complete it and put it in the granary where you're going to store it on the farm, in the granary or whatever, your shed, whatever it is, wherever you store your grain, and you put it in the pile there, meruach, in the granary. The other way is you bring it into your house. You bring it into the house. So you can also, if you don't bring it into your house, right, so it wasn't meruach in the granary, but you also didn't bring it into your house, rather, you brought him in through back doors and roofs, you avoided the front door. It also would be potter from trumas and maasers. So where are we? Like, what's going on? We said that, look, Rav had said that the shitas are consistent. If you say that by oved kochavim there's no trumas and maasers, there's also no challah. If there's trumas and maasers, there's challah. Yet we had two prices where there is trumas and maasers, but no challah. Rav had said, well, really that's according to the shita that there's no trumas and maasers and no challah, and that's consistent. But midrabanan they're chayiv by trumas and maasers because we're concerned about the wealthy people, that they'll make a kinyan with the oved kochavim in order to avoid trumas and maasers. So we say that even midrabanan the oved kochavim the chayiv and trumas and maasers. We say, what about challah? Shouldn't we be concerned? No, challah you could just make smaller batches and get out of it that way. But you could say the same thing by trumas and maasers. Just bring it in through the back door, or bring it in with its chaff so your animal can eat it. There are also ways to get out of it. Why do I need to make this gezerah specifically by Ovdei Kochavim, so that you'll avoid making a kinyan? Forget about the kinyan. Just like by challah, you can make a smaller batch. By trumas and maasers, just bring it in through the back door or something like that. Why do I need this gezerah by the Ovdei Kochavim? The answer is Hasim b'fayesya zila be'milsa hacha b'tzina lo zila be'milsa. The difference is, when it comes to challah, for example, if you have somebody with a big bakery and it's a big deal for him to have to separate all this challah, you know what he does? As we said, make smaller batches. Nobody knows. I don't know what's happening. What's a big bakery? I don't know, some local big bakery, whatever it is, some bakery chain or something like that. I don't know where they're baking their bread. I show up in the store, there's somebody, they have a whole bunch of bread. I buy the bread. I don't see what's going on in their kitchen. And therefore, if you have somebody with a big bakery and he wants to get out of separating challah, he doesn't need to make a kinyan with an oved kochavim. Make smaller batches in the kitchen. Nobody sees. Nobody knows what you're doing. You're an upstanding fellow in the community. No judgments. Nobody knows. However, when it comes to somebody with a big field, and people pass by the field, he's got a lot of fields, right? Big business, and people will drive by the field and they see that, wow, you see they're bringing in their grain while it's not fully processed because they're trying to because they're trying to save that 20%, or they're always bringing it in through the back door. They never bring it in through the right door. People will be able to see what's going on, and you know who's good. You know who? Do I have to? You know who? The bungalow colony, Shabbos afternoon. So people are going to see, and therefore, he might not want people to see and to be judging him. So instead, he'll say, you know what? Let me just get an oved kochavim. I'll make some kind of a kinyan with him, and it'll technically be his, and he'll do the meruach, and nobody will be able to know what's going on over here, and nobody will be able to see. So therefore, when it comes to Challah, there's really no need to involve an oved kochavim, because everything's happening behind the scenes. Just make smaller batches if you want to avoid Challah. Therefore, we don't need to make a gzera about the oved kochavim. By Trumas and Maaser, because things are happening out in the field, people are able to see it. It's more b'far hesya. So therefore, there would be a preference to making a kinyan with an oved kochavim in order to avoid paying Trumas and Maaser that way. So we say, you know what, midur abanim by Trumas and Maaser, oved kochavim are chayev in Trumas and Maaser to kind of close off that avenue of Trumas and Maaser aversion. Friends, that was Daf Samech Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta Menachos. On Daf Samech Zayin, we learned about Truma and Maaser for the produce of an oved kochavim. Of course, yesterday we learned about Trumas and Maaser when it comes to hektish, and be'etzem we said that there's no Trumas and Maaser by hektish. When it comes to an oved kochavim, Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say that it is chayiv in Trumas and Maaser. So Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon say potter from Trumas and Maaser. And then we discussed Challah for the dough of an oved kochavim. Rave had said that Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, who say chayiv by Trumas and Maaser, also say chayiv by Challah. Reb Yossi and Reb Shimon, who say potter by Trumas and Maaser, also say potter by Challah. However, we do say that midirabanan there would be a chiyuv to separate Trumas and Maaser out of concern for the wealthy people who would try to get around the Trumas and Maaser by making a kinyan with an oved kochavim. So therefore, midirabanan we say even oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Maaser, right? The produce of oved kochavim is chayiv in Trumas and Maaser, so that avenue of avoiding Trumas and Maaser would be closed. But really, me'ikar adin, like Rava says, if you hold that there's no Trumas and Maaser by an oved kochavim, there's no Challah by an oved kochavim, and if you hold that there is Trumas and Maaser by oved kochavim, there is Trumas and Maaser by there is Challah by an oved kochavim. I hope I said that right. Meaning Trumas and Maaser, Challah, they're consistent. Friends, that was Daf Samech Zayin, Daf 67 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.